Introduce our speaker. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, which is Jonathan Wilson. He's the CEO and Chief Value Creator and founder of Dubb Value Creation. Jonathan is a strategy and operations professional. He's focused on value creation for startup, fintech, and other more traditional organizations. He's got an MBA, and he's spent his career working for Fortune 500 companies and partnering with executives of within trailblazing organizations. And with that, Jonathan, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you for your presentation on sell-side readiness. So thank you, Jonathan, and you're on.
Yeah, before I begin, I just want to say thank you again for this opportunity. I'm so glad that you guys reached out to me. In terms of what today's conversation will be focused on, it's sell-side readiness. And this is really a presentation that's more geared towards the business owner. However, I think you guys can take the context and really kind of apply it to how you view a company that is sell-side ready and maybe what they can do to enhance their operations. So just a quick little overview about me. As mentioned, my sectors are consumer products, consumer services, financial services, fintech, healthcare, media and entertainment, professional services, and technology. My background started off with the Big Four, with Accenture. I worked with Bank of America, led their strategic planning and intelligence for the wholesale lending group. That was primarily actually for Countrywide Financial, if you remember Countrywide Financial. So yes, apparently our organization was blamed for little old ladies, signing loans in the dark. So at some point we ended up getting sold to Bank of America. That's where my first taste of M&A happened. And I just fell in love. And so went to go work for Deloitte in M&A, and then went to work for Grant Thornton in M&A. And since then have started my own company about 6 years ago. Many of my clients have been Fortune 500 clients. As on my own, I've had a combination of Fortune 500 and smaller organizations as well. So I've done $2 million deals. I've done multi-billion-dollar deals. It's definitely something that has been super fun. And then when you look at core capabilities, I start off my company as a management consulting firm. I am now double clicking on mergers and acquisitions primarily just because I want people to know when to call me and how to call me. And buy side and sell side is really our focus. Again, this shows a little bit more around the mergers and acquisitions piece, where we partner with leadership team members to ensure a robust strategy. We want to make sure we look at the target and buyer assessment piece. We do the due diligence. We also focus on integration and or separation, depending on the deal. So with that said, I'm going to keep moving. So the first thing is so we'll focus on the 8 fundamental value building concepts. And then we're also going to focus on what a rainmaker versus architect might look like as a business owner. So there are 8 different areas that you want to make sure you're focused on. One being financial performance, right? So that's taking a look at the revenue and the maturity of the record keeping. We were just talking about that in one of the breakout rooms. Growth potential. So just inherent and company-specific likelihood for business growth and what rate it's growing at. What we'll call the Switzerland structure. So that's the dependency of one's business on any one employee, customer, or supplier. We'll call the valuation teeter-totter, which is defining whether or not your business is more of a cash suck or a cash spigot. And hierarchy of recurring revenue, so making sure that we have a certain amount of revenue that is recurring as opposed to project-based or opportunity-based. Monopoly control, so making sure you have differentiation from your competitors within your industry. You want a certain level of monopoly within your niche. So that's very important. And then customer satisfaction, of course, likelihood that customers will return or at least refer you. And then the hub and spoke model. So if you were hit by a car and couldn't operate the business for 3 months, how well would the business do without you? So moving into this, right? So a few of the questions you want to be asking yourself is, what do you expect your revenue to be? Also, we think about earnings, EBITDA, right? So we think about earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. I realize who I'm speaking to, so I have to tell you that some of the context in here might be a little bit junior for you guys, but perhaps maybe it's still worth it to talk through. Also talking through what the annual revenue was, and then comparing what the most completed financial year is with the previous year, and then how mature the financial record keeping procedures are. So if there hasn't been an audit since the business has existed, if there hasn't been something along the lines of, let's say, cash accrual, versus different ways of operating, we want to make sure your business is able to be molded into or be aligned with the way that other companies might operate. So keep in mind that if there is a transaction that would be done, people are going to look for maturity of financial performance, financial record keeping. The growth potential. So you have to think about the industry, right? What industry are we in? Is that industry actually growing? And then on top of that, what is the market share of your business in relation to others? And then are you growing faster at the same speed as the industry? And then overarching, what makes your business model successful? So how would you describe that? And then how would you also articulate the possibility of the company selling more to your existing customers? So are you tapping your customers just for certain opportunities, or is there a way for you to be able to gain more revenue from your clients and be there to help solve more of their problems? The other piece too, from a Switzerland structure perspective, so the question there is, what percentage of your overall revenue did your largest customer represent last year? As you know, if you have a customer that's contributing more than 10% of your revenue, or even 5%, that could be a watch out. The other piece too is, what's the potential impact of losing your largest customer? So if you have the ability to keep moving, then you have adequately helped mitigate some of that risk, right? The other question is, think about also who contributes the most to your key areas of the business. So, and then ease or difficulty associated with replacing them. Employees are a great example, right? So if you want to make sure that all of your key employees are at least cross-training somebody else, you also want to make sure customers-wise that you have enough customers to make sure that you're able to survive potential downturn, or one customer doesn't feel like they are helping to guide your company. So sometimes a customer might feel empowered if they're contributing a lot more of your revenue than others. Also, from a supplier standpoint, you want to make sure you have at least 2 suppliers for every function that you need a supplier for. And the reason is that you want to make sure you're not too reliant on any given organization. There is a situation right now, even where we've seen companies that have had suppliers, let's say, go bankrupt, or they were slow to be able to deliver, and companies have been put out of business because of that. So that's something for us to be thinking about. That's something for every organization to be watching out for. Valuation teeter-totter, right? So how do you typically get paid by your customers? And then what is the typical gross profit margin? Those are things that really matter. And it's going to matter whether or not it's a services company or a products company, or a combination of the two. The other question is, what are the cash needs? What helps the business to stay afloat? So we always have to think about the working capital. We always have to think about exactly what it looks like from a valuation perspective. So, we need to think about and help people who are thinking about potentially purchasing your organization, exactly how much capital is going to be needed to keep the company running. And again, this goes back to recurring revenue. Recurring revenue is so key because we want to be able to predict and be able to forecast accurately. And keep in mind that recurring is very different than repeat, right? Recurring revenue indicates that you have a customer that is paying you monthly unless there is a desire to stop the service. Whereas a repeat customer might be someone who you did business with in the past, who decides to do business with you again, but they have a start and a stop to their engagement with you. So that's something to think through. How much recurring revenue do you have? How much repeat revenue do you have? And then what do the other revenues look like as well? And here are some fun facts. So businesses with recurring revenue, surprise, surprise, get more offers. So you can see right here is an example of 12% versus the 14%. And these net numbers were done, I think, at the end of 2019 or 2020. So I can actually get back to you on the actual dates for that, but it's somewhat recent or relatively recent. And then in terms of the better offers, wow. So average multiple for a company that, let's say, did not have recurring revenue versus had recurring revenue. I mean, that's at the 0.4, that makes a difference, right? So the other piece, when we talk about monopoly control, we sell in terms of how you describe your exclusivity of your business to your customers, in terms of, do you have a commodity or product service that customers can get from other suppliers, right? To the point of, we are the only one that you can probably get this product or service from. That will make you more attractive. So going from the top, which is, we are part of a larger ecosystem, and anybody can get the product. The only thing that differentiates us is our how, versus you really can't get the service or product anywhere else. A couple things to note, right? So companies with a monopoly in the market get 50% higher offers. So that is a big deal, right? So average multiple being 3.75 in this case. And you can look at someone who has a monopoly in all regions, it's 5.39. Just having a monopoly in the UK or Ireland can actually be a 6. So these are examples of how comparisons were made between those companies that had monopoly control versus those that did not, or at least against the average. From a customer satisfaction point, you want to think about what percentage of your customers are very satisfied. It's net promoter score is something that people talk about, but there's a lot of nuances and considerations you may want to think about when it comes to net promoter score. That's not necessarily a key metric that I look at personally, but it is something to be taken into account. The other piece is, how often do your customers actually refer your company to their friends and colleagues? I think that's a key metric. If you're not getting referrals, and that needs something about the services that you're offering, or maybe there's time to identify or reach out to your customers and ask why. And also the question is, in the last 12 months, what proportion of your customers complained in writing? And it's just a matter of those that took the time to complain in writing really took the time to say, here's what you can do better. Most people don't take the time to do that. They just stop giving you the service, right? Or they stop asking you for your service or for your product. So understanding those that take the time to give you feedback, listen, and make sure that is something that you can incorporate, and that'll make your company more valuable overall. Hub and spoke model. So again, do you have a management team? How would you describe your company's relationship with its customers? So here's the deal. If the owner knows all the customers by first name and has the strongest relationship with all of the customers, there is a challenge with being able to sell that company. So those are things that we need to be thinking through. What percentage of the company's revenue is taken by the CEO or the fellow equity holders? Or, is this something that would be able to sustain itself without a business owner being there? The other question is, how would your business perform if you were out of commission for 3 months, right? Again, if you were hit by a car, what would that look like? And God forbid anybody gets hit by a car. That's not what we want. So here's an example also on, companies that can survive in absence. Here's a history right here of how they might perform. So you can get up to, let's say, 21% which would be probably about, I don't know, 6 points above what any given company might get outside of having the hub and spoke model. So it's important to basically have that delegation in place. How do you make sure that your management team is being most effective? And you want to make sure you're keeping it going, keeping it moving, even without you. And again, that also means that you can actually retire a lot quicker too. So you don't have to stay in the company as long for the transition, et cetera. Now, the big question is, how do you know if you're in the middle too much, right? Well, there are lots of ways to ask that question. So owners interface with the customer, owner sells, owner offers 100 things. Only the owner can deliver. Those are all things that actually may hurt you as a company. So, business slows when you're away. That's a sign. Customers come to you when something goes wrong, right? If there's an issue and they're coming straight to you and not resolving it through the other channels, that's a challenge. And then if the revenue has plateaued, that's also a challenge as well. And keep in mind, for those of you that are on this call that are working with businesses that might have these challenges, just know that our job is to help them see this and to correct that and to allow for them to grow, to get more revenue, and to be more self-sustaining, so that we're able to sell the business a little bit quicker. Here's also an example of something that we may want to think through, right? It's the architect versus a rainmaker, right? So what kind of business person is focused on, what kind of owner, is the owner within the company? Is it an architect or a rainmaker? And I'm going to go through the differences between the two. So the rainmaker, they might do business development, they might do sales, they might do customer relations, they might do client service. An architect, on the other hand, will focus on designing the market funnel, they'll focus on designing the sales process, and they'll focus on creating brand initiatives. It's very hard to create the foundation, but you want to make sure someone's taking the time to take a look at what they're doing. These people are more likely to have a strategy as it relates to the company, as opposed to the rainmaker just focus on getting the numbers in the door. And that does create a different level of sophistication and maturity for the company. And this shows you on the level of gratification. Yes, rainmaker, instant gratification. The higher competency they have with that. However, there's deferred gratification, but longer term gratification for the architect. The other piece too is in terms of how much value is transferable. We'll take a look at the architect versus a rainmaker. Yes, the rainmaker does do well in the very beginning, but it does plateau over time. However, with an architect, you'll see that's exponential growth. And that's something to really be thinking about too, because they're also creating a foundation that the rest of the team can build off of. And it actually helped to fine tune, maybe for a company that is looking to purchase some of their capabilities. That company will have not only just a roadmap for success, but be able to look at what they can do better to help grow it even further. Again, so the architect actually tends to attract more offers. So that's something to think about. You can look at this overarching, and you can see absolutely those who have not received an offer versus those that have received an offer, depending on whether they're an architect or not. You'll see versus the multiples, right? So these are things that, one of the things I like to call out too here, right? So I don't know my customers personally. A multiple here is greater than 6. 33% of these particular companies will most likely get or have received an offer that's multiple of greater than 6, versus those that know their customers very well and first name basis and smoothing and whatnot. Very few of those companies will receive multiples of 6 or higher, so 14%. So that's double, actually, if you look at it that way. Now the question here is, how do you transition from a rainmaker to an architect? and this is good for anybody, whether or not you're looking to sell your company or not, it's number one, focusing on designing the marketing funnels that will work while you sleep, right? Number two, documenting the sales process. So making sure you have a good understanding of what that looks like from the time that you have identified a potential sales target to the time that you're actually onboarding the new prospect. You want to think about hiring salespeople that are used to selling products. However, if you have a service-based business, you also want to make sure you're hiring salespeople that are used to selling services. So it depends on your business. You also want to limit the complexity of your organization. So simple, simple, simple. Keep everything simple. You also want to avoid customizing, right? If you can, you want to make sure that your systems are in place that require very little customization, and that allows for a lot more flexibility with the organization. You also want to set your salespeople up as experts. So you want to make sure that they have all the knowledge about the products and the services that they're selling. So they should not be coming to the CEO for questions around the services or the products. They should really be able to answer the questions on their own and serve as the one-stop shop for any questions that a potential prospect might have. Also, you want to make sure you never attend a customer meeting alone. So always bring more junior resources with you. Always bring someone who is curious or looking to grow or potentially may replace you in the future. Create those customer testimonials. You want to make sure that you understand exactly what made you successful and or what you might need to improve upon. And the other piece too, feel comfortable with what you provide from a service standpoint or a product standpoint, and always offer that guarantee. So if they're not happy, allow them the opportunity to get their money back, or that you will stay on until they are happy. So those are things that you want to make sure you're doing as a business owner and or someone who is looking to sell their company. With that said, just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to speak to this organization. Again, so if you have any need for assistance with general advisory, executive workshops, playbook development, I have people that do CPA, quality of earnings, business valuations, commercial due diligence, all the great things that we love about M&A. So feel free to reach out. Would love to just kind of ask if there are any questions or any thoughts around what this presentation was. Happy to share some additional insights.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. And I assume that your materials will be available to our group, your slides?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Great. We'll post them in our Dropbox folder. Can you take a couple of questions?
Absolutely, yeah, happy to take questions.
Okay, well, let me start it off. I noticed I think I saw a slide that said that you don't want the company be too reliant on one supplier or too reliant on a small number of customers. Guess what I'm wondering, we're living in such uncertain economic times. And it's coming at us from a lot of different directions and ways that that have been just unimaginable not that long ago. World events, markets disappearing, companies disappearing. I'm just wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that. Like, how can, first of all, is there an increased need to hedge against that risk, given what's going on in the economy? And secondly, how can we reduce that risk, given how uncertain the economy is?
Well, a principle that I like to say in my own head is that someone is winning in every market, in every economic situation. Somebody wins. The question is, how can you make sure you're that someone, right? So there are some industries that do well during recessions, and there are some industries that do well when in line with what the economy is doing. So, for example, there's going to be more emphasis on technology typically during a recession. So companies are looking to right-size their operations, or looking to grow certain aspects of automation, So that's something that they might be looking to acquire a company that would allow them to do that. So now, right now, for example, AI is a big conversation, right? So you would assume that many companies that are focused on anything related to data, or data management, or artificial intelligence are companies that are a little bit more attractive within the M&A market. The other piece too is make sure that you have at least a few different industries that you're looking at, right? You don't want to necessarily be too reliant on one industry. And the only reason is because if a downturn happens, you're stuck holding the bag. So, but definitely make sure that you are diversifying your services, your service offerings, and the industries that you serve. And also sizes of companies too, because some companies might do better than others, depending on the size.
Yeah. I mean, there's one other thing that kind of caught my attention as you were speaking. You were talking about how you like to see monopoly, a degree of monopoly in sell-side companies, which I think is really hard to do. When I think of monopoly, I just think of intellectual property, maybe because I'm in Silicon Valley. But is that kind of what you mean? Because how else are does a company really, establish any like unfair competitive advantage over a particular sector? Or is there something else you mean by monopoly?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess, let's not talk about, I guess from a legal perspective, yes, you legally cannot have a monopoly, or you can be fined for having too much of a monopoly, but you want to corner the market, right? So let's talk about cornering the market. You want to make sure you have a niche service that you're offering. So someone says, I'm looking for a company that does data management specific to med tech companies that are between 10 million and 15 million dollars. That is a specific niche, and if they are the leaders in that is a great company to be selling, right? Because there's a lot of potential companies in that range. That's the kind of monopoly that we want to talk about from a service offering standpoint. How many people do what you do in your part of the market? And that is key for you to be thinking about, especially as you differentiate yourself in the marketplace.
Okay, great.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Okay, any other questions? Go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the chat, or just speak up. If any other questions from our group? Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any. I'm
comfortable with people saying, I haven't found this, or I love it when people are just saying, that may be true, but. So feel free to pressure test.
Okay.
I just had a quick comment that what you talked about revenue concentration from a customer. I had a couple of clients that I sold. I think sometimes they become like a death grip. The owner is happy. This customer is like giving me business, like whatever. They can keep me busy all day long, 3 shifts a day, and all that kind of things. But they are like a death grip. They don't have time to market to anybody else. They don't have capacity to take more work, and I haven't figured out how to help them. I know what happens in terms of an M&A transaction, and we figure out a way to make it work. But I found it's unfortunate.
I think I lost you for a second.
The owners get into that situation. They are in that whatever. Anyway, I just thought of.
No, I like what you just said. I think the thing is that usually means that there's a little bit of comfort also. So we want to make sure that we are not too comfortable, and I think for that client in particular, you want to also help them. They have to hire someone to focus on marketing and business development, because at some point that client is either going to go away or have demands that are slightly unreasonable, and there's nowhere else to turn. So it's very key that they focus on business development in some capacity. Use extra revenue, charge a little bit more to that client, use that extra revenue to grow their pipeline.
Yeah.
Yep.
Space is him, by the way. He can ask your question next.
Yep.
Yeah, my question, kind of comment question, you touched on it briefly, but not as much as I thought you would. Something I see a lot of that's a big problem is a lot of companies don't realize the value of quality financial statements. I mean, I run into companies that are pretty good level in sales and they're still running off of QuickBooks. They don't have audited financials, and I just find it's crazy. I was just curious how often you run into that, and do you see that as a big issue in your practice, Jonathan?
Depends on the size of the company, right? Because a company that's maybe 10 million might have, they probably wouldn't have audited, they probably may not have audited reports, but they will at least have somebody outside of their company that is looking over their financials, which is the first step towards having an audited financial. But to your point, it's actually a lot more common for smaller companies not to have really well-vetted financials, unfortunately. And it's important that someone goes through that. I mean, I don't know how many deals have been delayed because someone didn't have the right people looking at their financials. I was just, I don't want to call anybody out on the call, but we were just in a breakout room, and somebody was mentioning that they're having challenges with their client's accounting. So it's a very common scenario, which is also why you ask for it up front.
All right. Okay. Any other questions here?
Paul raised his hand too.
Okay. Go ahead. One more.
Hi, Jonathan. Yeah, very comprehensive list of value factors there. So one challenge you often see is that business owners have an inflated sense of what their company is worth, and you often run into that. And how do you use the different factors to help bring them down to earth?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't know how many people have kids, right? But the concept of somebody putting a dollar value in your kid, right, is really the equivalent of this, right? And on top of that, you think your kid is phenomenal. However, someone else might think your kid has a couple of blemishes, has a few things that they need to work on, right? So it's really hard for someone to have an objective point of view around their own company, which is why they've hired you. So you have to really be thoughtful in terms of how you're giving the feedback, how you're working on the valuation. And then also using comparables is very key, right? So being able to reference, here's what the marketplace is showing, and this is comparable to your company because, right? And I think that is very common, though, more common than not, that an owner might think their company is worth more than it is.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions, Adam?
No, that's it.
Okay. Now